This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a highly popular actress and author who will always be remembered for her portrayal of the quick-witted, savvy Thelma Evans on the groundbreaking TV sitcom Good Times, developed and executive produced by the legendary Norman Lear, and which ran for 6 seasons in the late 70s. Good Times was the first TV show to give us an authentic portrayal of the Black family, a household with 2 loving, devoted, hardworking parents and 3 positive, motivated children. The show broke barriers and redefined what family, community, and success looked like for Black America. Our guest was the first Black female teenager to be a regular cast member of a TV show, and because of her talent, charisma, sophistication, and grace, her portrayal of Thelma had a hugely positive impact, not only on the Black community, but on everyone. She became the personification of beauty, intelligence, ambition, and success for multiple generations of young women of every race and background. In addition to her iconic role in Good Times, our guest has appeared in numerous feature films and TV movies, including Land of the Free, Hidden Blessings, Caution, Heartache Ahead, No Regrets, The Big Shot, Once in a Valentine, and A Christmas Blessing. She's also appeared in many TV shows like The Love Boat, The Cosby Show, The Wayans Brothers, Black Jesus, and most recently, she plays Nene Duncan in the hit TV series The Family Business and The Family Business New Orleans. Our guest has also written 5 books: The Last Night, A Caregiver's Journey Through Transition and Beyond, Situations 101, Relationships, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Situations 101, Finances, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, For Men Only, and last year, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Good Times, she wrote a wonderful memoir entitled Good Times, Ain't We Lucky We Got 'Em? Memoir of an American Sweetheart, which chronicles her journey from the Van Dyke projects of Brooklyn, New York, to the bright lights of Hollywood. And in 2006, our guest and her fellow cast members from Good Times received the prestigious TV Land Impact Award. I am delighted and honored to welcome the fabulous Miss BernNadette Stanis to our show. BernNadette, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Harvey, for having me.
It's my pleasure. Now, you grew up in the pretty tough neighborhood of Brownsville in Brooklyn, New York, and your father, Gregory, used to say, "What's around you does not have to be in you." How did that expression affect you as you were growing up?
Well, we've always heard that expression because the neighborhood was not so good. And he wanted us to realize that although you walk in an area that may not be so good, it's you, it's your mind, it's what you want to do. And what's around you does not have to be in you unless you decide that you want that to happen. So he made sure that we never wanted to decide that.
Great advice, great mentoring from a parent. Now, you were planning to study psychology, but then you got admitted to the acting program at Juilliard. And after your first year, you were spotted by a talent manager in the Teenage Miss Black America pageant, which ultimately led you to landing the role of Thelma on Good Times. Can you remember, BernNadette, the moment when you found out that you got the part?
Oh, wow. Yes, I can. I can remember that. We were still in the projects, of course, and I had gone to the supermarket to get something for Mom. And when I came in, it was like about 4:30, like a Sunday afternoon, or I think maybe it was Saturday afternoon. And Mom was sitting down on a couch with her legs crossed. Like, I'm walking in the house, I'm like, what? And it's like she can speak. We spoke through our eyes. I kind of knew something, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and with a smile on her face, I said, "What?" She said, "You got it. You're Thelma."
What a moment. Now, you went from growing up in the projects to actually portraying life in the projects on TV. Did
Isn't
your
that something?
It is amazing. Did your real life childhood help prepare you to play Thelma?
I would say it did. I really would say it did. It's so funny because my brother, who's Gregory Kyle Stanislaus, he's a pastor, and we were talking one day, and he said to me, "Bern," he called me Bern, "Bern, I do believe that you were born to play Thelma." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, I do." Because my life was so similar to that. And I tried so hard in life just to be a good girl, to do the best I can do, to make my parents proud because there were five children. So, I was the eldest and I had to be a role model for them. And I just wanted to make them proud of me and happy. So, whatever I decided to do, I was going to put my all into it. And so, when I became Thelma, that's what I aspired to do because I wanted them to know that although you come from a project or not so privileged growing up or whatever, that if you have in your heart and soul that you want to become something and you're determined and you're educated, there's nothing that you cannot do. And I wanted to portray that character like that. And I wanted her to be a good girl. Back in those days, good girl meant, good girl.
Well, you were born to play Thelma. I want to read you something that you wrote in your book about playing Thelma, BernNadette. You said, I had a strong drive to ensure that Thelma would be more than just a teenager. I envisioned her as a symbol of hope and ambition for young Black women everywhere. Drawing from my own upbringing in the Brownsville projects of Brooklyn, I wanted Thelma to be bright, focused, and full of dreams, a character always reaching for more. So, BernNadette, my question to you is, how receptive were the writers to that vision of yours?
That's amazing. Even on the audition, I even asked Norman Lear, could I improvise? Because the writing at that time, and no fault of theirs, they didn't understand the character. They didn't understand a teenager in projects. So the writing was not what we would do or what we would say. So I asked Norman at that time, can I improvise? Because these words and this conversation, we wouldn't say this. So he looked at me and he said, go ahead. And that's when I improvised with Jimmy and I did it the way I would do my real brothers, the way we talk. And so he loved it. I know he did. He smiled, he laughed, and that was that. But as time went on in the show, they didn't write for me well. They didn't know. And so I got bored. I really did because all I did was come in, say, hi, mom, hi, dad, shut up, JJ. And I was always in the bathroom. So this is like 6 months into the show. I spoke with Esther Rolle, whom I called mom, and I made sure she knew I was going to be her real daughter, Hollywood daughter. And so I said, I went to her home, we would have dinner and everything. I said, Mom, this week I was so bored and I just feel that I could do more. I can say more. I don't have a voice. I don't have any. And she looked at me and she said, oh, really? I said, yes. She said, you can do more. Okay. Well, let me handle it. And I was so happy she said that because I didn't know what to do. And so she said, okay. And that Friday when we had table read, of course, I had my 6 lines. Hi, mom, hi, dad, and shut up, JL, in the bathroom. And so at the end of the table read, Esther spoke with the producers because, of course, the producers and the writers are all there at that time. And she said, I have a question. We're all sitting around. And they said, yes, Esther, what is the question? She said, I want to ask you, are you ashamed of my daughter? They said, no, we're not ashamed of your daughter. She said, well, my son JJ has a lot to say. My son Michael has a lot to say. And I want my daughter to have a voice as well. And they said, oh, well, certainly, of course. And she said, okay, what I want her to go up to the office with you guys and sit down with her and let her tell you who Thelma is. So actually, I was given the privilege to create my character.
Do you know how unique that is in sitcom?
That is so unique.
Well, you mentioned the legendary Esther Rolle. who played Florida, your mom on Good Times, she really was a second mother and a mentor to you in real life. You described her in your book as a force to be reckoned with. What did you mean by that?
Well, although she was calm and she's just a lovely woman, she always had like an eye over the show. It's like whatever would come past her, she would digest it and agree or disagree. So they had to do it according to what she knew a Black family was about. So sometimes they would come and they would say things and have her do things. The lines would be in such a way that Esther would have to say, "I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. I think that this is the way it should be." Or say, for instance, they say something about her daughter had an opinion and she would say, okay, well, your opinion could be like whatever it was. She had to break it down and bring it to them and let them see how a Black mother would feel with her daughter be doing this or her son doing that. So she was very, very like mother hen over the show, which is very true because she knows what a Black mother would do and what a Black woman would say and do. And they kind of respected that. I mean, they had their words about it. We don't think that. Yes, we think that. And so that's how that went.
Well, I know that Esther insisted that her character not be a single mom, and she and John Amos fought against stereotypes and insisted on authentic portrayals for every character on the show. And it became well known that Esther Rolle and especially John Amos became unhappy with the writing on the show. John Amos said that the scripts did not reflect the reality of Black family life in America. Did you agree that some of the scripts were unreasonable?
There were one or two scripts that John objected to about something pertaining to what he would say to his daughter or what he would say to Thelma or whatever. And those kind of things they had their little differences about because it was like, well, we didn't mean it like that. It's not like that. No, it's really not like that. But in the Black community, it would be something else. So they understood that. They kind of gave in to us a lot. And there was just some other things that were going on that the producers didn't agree with and things like that. But I think that they did a wonderful job when they could. And John was a young man at the time. He was 34 years old and Esther was 54. So there's a 20-year difference there, meaning that I'm sure if John was older at the time, he would see things a little more calmly, maybe.
Well, I read that Esther Rolle and John Amos were also unhappy with the way Jimmy Walker's character, JJ, was being portrayed as kind of a stereotype buffoon, which they felt was a put down of young Black men. How did you feel about the JJ character?
Well, I just love Jimmy. So he's crazy. I'm slap, shut up, JJ. I got my little point across. But what that really was is that Jimmy would tell you in a minute, I am not an actor, I am a comedian. And so as a comedian, I'm not looking for the social realist type of, I'm not doing that. I'm looking for the laughs. He was looking for the laughs and he got the laughs, but they just didn't want the writers or the producers or the world to see him as just a joke, or just funny. They wanted him to have some kind of a backbone. And when he, as an artist, he had to be pretty deep somewhere. So she wanted to reflect that, not just as someone who was finding things. That had to go. They could not handle that. Finding means stealing, so they had to erase that. No, my son is not going to steal. Okay, we don't want that finding stuff. No, he'll work hard and so they cut that out. That was in the first couple of times, and then they cut that out. But you have to understand, Jimmy was 28. So he was grown too. And so they just didn't, he had his point of view about being a comedian, and they had their point of view about being thespians. So you're going to have a natural clash there because the thespians are going to see it so real, and the comedian's going to say, well, come on, it's a joke.
Well, in September 1975, Ebony magazine published an article entitled Bad Times on the Good Times Set, all about the infighting between the cast and the producers. And then they fired John Amos at the end of season 3 by killing off his character. Were you aware, BernNadette, of all the tension behind the scenes?
Well, when that article came out, I mean, we did not know what it was about. They asked me, I mean, they interviewed everyone. They even interviewed one of the producers, Alan Mannings, whom we love very, very much also. Alan was very open-minded and he spoke positive about the show. They asked me a few questions. I spoke positive because I believed it was positive. And Esther and John voiced their opinion, just like we're voicing our opinion and everything right now. But the fault came to me as a person looking on, and I was a young woman, and what I really saw, and I was very observant because I was taught to observe more than I speak by John Amos, by James. But I saw it as this. Ebony put so much emphasis on the bad. They wanted to make it so sensational that it was all bad. And it really wasn't all bad. I mean, we were the first kind of show coming from a lot of the white shows that these writers and producers did work on. So we got treated the same way they did in so many ways. It's just that the content of the show was different. So the way Ebony wrote it was so bad, like we were being treated so badly. And that was so wrong and unfair. It was unfair to Norman. It was unfair to the writers. It was unfair. It was unfair to me. I didn't like it. I said, well, where's the good in this? And it hurt Norman. It really hurt him. And I can understand that. Instead of just coming to him or whatever, Ebony could have talked to him or whatever. And even when they talked to Alan Mannings, Alan was positive. He said, we have a little tension here and there, like in any show. And also like in any family, you're going to have some disagreements, but we're a family. We were all a family and you work them out. But the way Ebony spun it, it was very hurtful. It was hurtful to our show. It was hurtful to Norman. It was hurtful to Esther. It was hurtful to John.
Well, we lost John Amos at the end of season 3, and then Esther Rolle was gone for the entire 5th season because her character remarried and moved to Arizona. Why was Esther Rolle away from the show for an entire season? I missed her.
Yeah, we missed her. It was just a lot of changes going on, you know. But as you know, I look back at the show now, and actually, the reason why people still watch the show is that the show had so many different family types in the show that they reflect today. The adoption, single parenthood, the whole nine. But getting back to the question about John leaving the show and Esther leaving the show. Well, John left the show because there was a bitter taste in the whole atmosphere by this time. When something goes bad, it kind of looks, everything you say is bad, everything you do is bad. And then John was fighting a lot with the situation because there was a lot of animosity at this time. And so they just said, look, we're going to just erase this character. They were upset too,
Well, you must have been thrilled when Esther came back to the show for Thelma's wedding and for the rest of season 6.
I was so thrilled. But Esther left, and also that was a big deal because they married her. She didn't want to get married again. They married her to, now the actor that played Carl, he was a wonderful actor, but they made him an atheist. Now, she's a Christian. You're going to have her marry an atheist. That's not even it doesn't even fit. So she got mad and she left the show because she didn't understand, why are you going to let me leave and go to Arizona? They just wrote it all wrong. It was just ugliness going on. So at the end, they had Thelma get married to, a football player and all. And then Esther came back for the last show. I was glad because it was my wedding, so it would be proper for her to be there.
Well, your wedding, Thelma's wedding, was the first wedding of a Black couple ever seen on television. Were you happy with the writer's decision to have Thelma get married?
Yes, but it's so funny because back in the 70s, okay, 50 years ago, in society, women were getting married, okay, at 18, 19, they were getting married. And I was right on the verge of the new woman wanting to go to college. So now, does she get married or does she go to college? So we ended up doing both. She went to college and she did get married, but it was right on the break where, women were no longer wanting to get married at 20 or 21, and they wanted to go to college and they wanted to get a life of their own and things like that. So I was right on the whole crux of that thing. So they didn't know what to do with me. So I suggested, well, I can do both. I mean, married women could go to college. So I went to college first, I guess, and then eventually I got married.
You married Keith Anderson, played by Ben Powers. He was fine.
Thank you.
Now, one of the things that made Good Times so monumental back in the late 70s is that the show dealt with many important social issues like systemic racism, economic inequality, gang violence, prison reform, drug addiction, even child abuse when Janet Jackson joined the cast in the role of Penny, the abused child. Do you know if the network censors caused any trouble for the show?
No, they did not. It was a lot more open then than it is now. They're very, very sensitive. Everybody's so sensitive to every little thing. But back then we didn't do that. When we had just gotten over the 60s and stuff like that. So this was like a new burst of the world and everything. And Norman was such an edgy person. I mean, he was so political and he always wanted to make a statement, political statement, and he did. And he wanted to bring out the injustices and he wanted to, I mean, he was just great. He was a great man for that. And I respect him so much for that. And so we had to bring out all the stuff and all the issues and the drugs and the pregnancy and the VD and the this and that. And I just thought he was brilliant.
I'm so glad you said that because I want to read you something you wrote in your book about Norman Lear. It touched me so deeply. You said, Norman was a class act and a safe person for us. Being young and vulnerable, I moved across the country away from everything and everyone I had ever known for my first acting job. Someone in power with bad intentions could have taken advantage of me. I am extremely blessed and fortunate that such a thing did not happen. I hit the jackpot by working with Norman. He created a safe environment for the young people under his care. BernNadette, that is a real mouthful. That's a very important thing you said because you and I both know that many young people in Hollywood were badly exploited by unscrupulous producers and directors who were sexual predators. And it's so good to know that Norman Lear was a really good, decent person besides being so talented.
Absolutely. A class act. I mean it. I mean it. Every time I used to see him, I just wanted to run up and hug him. I just loved him in that way. He was a sweet guy to me. I mean, whatever other people may say, but he was so sweet, and I would always hug him. And I have such great pictures with he and I, where he hugged me, and just I could see the love. He loved me.
You had some amazing guest stars on Good Times like Philip Michael Thomas, Jay Leno, Stymie Beard, Helen Martin, the legendary Louis Gossett Jr., who played your boyfriend in season 2. Then in season 3, he played Florida's brother, Wilbert. What was he like to work with?
Oh, he was regal. He was a regal man. I just love watching him. And he was just so cute playing Donald, with his little bald head and then the hair around made him look older. And so when he came in, Donald, you need to stay downstairs. What's wrong with you? And my dad says, look, man, you want a beer? I just loved it. It was great. He was a great, great guy. Great
I
guy.
will always be immensely grateful that I had the privilege of giving Lou Gossett Jr. his final in-depth interview. I hope all our viewers will watch it. It was very special. I have to say that I've also interviewed 2 other people who asked me to give you their love, Peebo Bryson and Little Anthony. I told them you were coming on the show and they just love you so much.
Oh, I know they do. And I have to tell you about my love for them. When I was 12 years old, my girlfriend and I went to we went to church. So we went to Catholic church and everything. And then after that was a Sunday. And then we go down to the Picken Theater because Little Anthony and Imperials were going to be, on there. And so there are like three shows. It's like the 12 o'clock show and the 3 o'clock show and the 6 o'clock show. Okay. So there were no cell phones or anything like that back then. So we sat down there. We were about 12 years old. And we sat down and we saw Little Anthony Pierce. Now, I was in love with Little Anthony Pierce. I always fell in love with singers. But anyway, I was in love with Little Anthony Imperials. And when he sat there, I was right in the front and I would just look at him and I'm like, oh my God, I just think he's so gorgeous. I love him. I'm doing all this. And so after the show was over and everything, Judy and I, her name was Judy, we looked at each other and we said, you want to stay for another show? She said, yeah, well, let's stay for another show. We sat down there and we stayed for the 6 o'clock show. And so we stayed and stayed and stayed. Neither one of us called our parents. So there was a 9 o'clock show. I mean, a six, and so I said, want to stay for the 9 o'clock show? She said, yeah, I stayed for the 9 o'clock show. Well, I looked in the corner over there. My mother was standing up in that theater and she was livid. She said, BernNadette, don't you ever do that to me again. She didn't holler. She didn't hit. She wouldn't hit me. But, don't you ever do that. I was so worried about you. You should have called me. I never did that to her again, but I just knew I had to stay.
I totally get it. And Peebo Bryson, what a voice.
Now, Peebo Bryson, I think I fell in love with him in my own way, and I think he fell in love with me in his own way. But we both were coming up at that time where he was a big star and I was a big star, and I had to be at good times all the time, and he had to be on the road all the time. So we kind of knew that would never really work because we would never be together. But we always admired each other's work, and he was always a gentleman to me. And I would go see his shows, and he would watch all my shows, and we just shared a nice, like, professional love. That's what it was.
There's a lot of love there. You mentioned those two stars, but over the years, BernNadette, you've gotten to meet some major legends, including Mae West, Lucille Ball, Jack Benny, Michael Jackson, Billy D. Williams, Richard Pryor,
Greta Young.
Denzel, Beyonce, so many others. Do you ever get starstruck?
Yes, I do. I did all my life. I still do. It's so funny because I'm that girl that fall in love with stars. I remember the Billy D thing. I fell in love with Billy D and Brian's song. And also that one. And so when I found out this was the first CBS dinner we ever went to, and I didn't know, I was young, green, not knowing anything, and all these stars are there, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'm sitting next to John Amos. And so I had my purse and I had my notes in my purse and I had my little wallet and my pen and my paper, and I had everything set. What the purse was right here and everything. And I knew that Billy D was going to walk in that way and sit, on a table ahead of us. So I first saw him and I said, oh my God, he's coming. Oh my God. So when he walked to about, an angle where it was very clear for me to walk, and I grabbed my purse and I was on my way. And John Amos grabbed my wrist and said, where are you going? I said, I'm going over there to get, Billy D's autograph. He said, no, you're not. I said, what? He said, sit down. So I sat down and he said, you can't do that. I said, why not? He said, you can't do that because now you're one of them. You're one of us. You can't do that. I'm like, one of what? Us? What? That was the first time I'm like,
It's a very good point he made because let's face it, BernNadette, you became extremely famous almost overnight, not only as an actress, but as a fashion icon. You were a sex symbol. Was being so famous a difficult adjustment for you?
It's so silly. I'm so silly. I never really knew how famous it was. I didn't because in those days they controlled our fan mail. So every week, everybody would get just a certain amount of fan mail. So I didn't know how popular I was. I just knew, I was popular, but not, I didn't know. And because my fan mail was not as high as John, Esther, or Jimmy's. Mine was like down a little lower. And then Ralph Carter's was like next to mine. So we were not really thinking that. We were all set in a mindset. I would get my fan mail, and that's how it would come. So a lot of my fan mail I never got.
You were the one who introduced tight jeans and fitted tops to the young women of America. Didn't you realize you were starting a fashion trend?
Now that I did know because I couldn't stand the big floppy jeans with the pockets. And I had a butt, and everything. And and I looked like a huge thing on there. I said, no, 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 no. And I'm a dancer. So everything had to be tight. I feel better that way. And so I would have the wardrobe. Adela Farmer, who was so fantastic. She said, don't you worry, I'll fix it. And she took the pockets out for me and she sewed those jeans down to my knees. She sewed the shirts down so they could fit me because being a dancer, I like my clothes tight. And my clothes being baggy, I just don't feel like myself. So she did all that. So therefore, we started that trend. And I get women today say, oh, when I was a little girl, I would say, what is Thelma going to wear? And how's she going to wear her hair? And they all followed me that way. But I hear that now that I'm an author and I wrote all these books and everything, and I travel all the time, that's when I found out how popular I was. Because all women, men, sometimes they had tears in their eyes. And I'm so glad that my mother was able to experience that with me. And one day she said, Bern, they love you. I said, yeah, Ma. But I didn't even realize how much they loved me. But I meant so much to them because I was the first Black female teenagers. So they looked at me, the young girl said, well, that's like my big sister. I want to be like her. She dances, she's this. And that's exactly what I always wanted, for them to look at me like that. And then the guys would say, um, you were my first crush. I was a little guy, but you were my first crush.
Well, when you became famous and people wanted to get close to you, how did you learn to tell the difference between the people who were sincerely interested in you as a person and those who just wanted to be around you because you were a famous star?
Well, it never stopped. That never stopped. Because even to this day, I have met people who I thought would be friends of mine, and I even knew them for a long time. But it was really a clout thing, and it hurt me because I always thought that they were really friends, but they really weren't. That's going to always happen when it comes to stars. And so therefore, that's why I understand why stars are guarded and that they talk to people and everything like that, but they're very guarded as far as letting people in their inner circle because sometimes we learn and we get hurt, because people get jealous for some reason. They're not friends. And when they get too close, they think, well, she's regular, so maybe I could probably be her, or maybe I can become better than her. I mean, it's a psychological thing that happens to some people. And I found that to be very weird, but I realized that, people can get jealous.
Yeah, you got to surround yourself with people that are the real deal. Now, when Good Times was canceled after 6 seasons, even though the show was still in the top 10, was there any talk of giving Thelma and Keith a spin-off series?
Well, they had such a, I guess, bitter taste about it that it just dropped like that, which really was very sad because I believe it would have been so beautiful for Thelma and Keith to have had a series, a spinoff, because everything was spinning off in the shows. And I think that was one of the mistakes that the networks and Norman at that time did, because I think it should have happened.
I do too. Now, I know that in real life, Jimmy Walker is nothing at all like the flamboyant, exuberant JJ on Good Times. And in 1987, you reunited with him on an episode of Bustin' Loose. What was it like to work together again?
Great working with Jimmy again. He was still the same Jimmy. Little Richard was on that show, and I got a chance to really meet him. And he was a great guy too. He was really a great guy. So he was like a big star to me. And I enjoyed working on that with them. Yeah, it was
You
good.
are the voice of Peaches in the Netflix animated reboot of Good Times. What do you think of that show?
Well, I never even saw the show, so I didn't see my character at all. I didn't see it, but I was told that it was going to be a spinoff, of Good Times kind of cartoon, which, to be honest with you, I do believe it was something that Jimmy brought to them a few years ago. And then they spun it another way. And, but his version of it was this. We would still have our voices and the cartoons would look like us, and we would do something from that spin off and make it like a new thing, continuation type of thing. And that would have been wonderful. The audience would have loved that. But when they said, do the peaches, okay, I'll do the character like that. I decided that they didn't want us to do our parts. They didn't want the show to be like that. So they rewrote it in another way. So I did my little character, and Jimmy did his little character, but they didn't tell us about the whole show. So when the show came out, it was not flattering to Good Times. It had nothing really to do with Good Times. And I think maybe their show would have worked had they not used Good Times as the title, because the audience wanted to see us. They wanted to see Good Times, the continuation. That's what it was. And so when we saw the show and they were back in the projects, and as you can tell, there were lyrics in the show that they had to even take out, talking about roaches roaming the hallways and all this other stuff. Jim Gilstrap, who was the original singer, said they took it out because they didn't want to offend Black people or any people, poor people or whatever, 50 years ago. But 50 years later, they're going to bring the roaches back. In fact, the roaches are in the shower singing Good Times. I mean, I thought that was a little bit, I didn't think that was nice at all. And then they had a baby in the mother's arms doing crack. That's not Good Times.
No, I didn't agree with that show at all.
No.
Now, one of the things that's so admirable and impressive about you, BernNadette, is that after Good Times was canceled, you diversified your career into stage work, teaching dance and acting classes, writing books. How did you learn to find so many ways to reinvent yourself?
Well, I always thought that I had talent and I was intelligent enough to know that. And, there's got to be more to this thing than just that show. Wait a minute now. And so, I'm very religious. I love God so very much. I pray all the time. I'm just one of those kind of people. And so I sat down one day and I said, now, God, okay. Now, I did Good Times and we did the best we could. I said, but it's time for me to do something else. And I prayed about it. And I said, you have to show me another way of, doing something. And things started to open up for me, like plays. People would ask me to do plays and this and that and gospel plays. And at first I said, well, I don't know about that. That's a lot of traveling. That's a lot of this and that. And then I started reading the scripts and they weren't bad at all. And I said, maybe that'll work. So I started doing those things. I ended up producing plays myself. I produced Whatever Happened to Black Love. I did that across the country, and I hired a lot of my professional actors to do it, and it was great. But I was one of the stars of the show. I was one of the attorneys, and Ernest Thomas was the other attorney. It was a really great show. But it had become tiring. It's a lot of work dealing with being a producer, handling so many actors, and then having to get up there and star in the show. So I kind of got burnt out of it. Then I said, I want to do something else. I've got to do something else because I can't continue. This is too hard. And then I decided that I always wanted to write, and I always knew I was going to write. And I said, well, maybe this is the time to start writing. And Being that I traveled so much and had so many friends that used to call me and ask me about their relationships and ask me about things, and I was like a little older than them. So I would give them great advice, I thought. And, of course, you have some that would listen. I'm not a professional, but I'm a person that had, some good ideas about relationships. So I would give them these ideas, and it helped so many of them. And some of them it didn't. They continued to do their own thing. Okay, I said, well, okay, I got to stop this. They're dumping on me. They're not learning. They're dumping on me. So it got to a point where I just said, I'm going to stop that. And I started thinking about all the things that I heard and all the answers that I gave them and traveling. And then I realized that so many people have these same questions, same problems. And so what I came up with was writing a book on relationships, but I wrote 101 situations and my responses to them. And that book took off like I don't know what. I mean, everybody says, "Oh my God, I love the book." It's just like I was there. I was a fly on the wall and I'm looking at somebody's relationships. So that's how that book got started. And that's how I became a writer. And after that, I realized that finances was a big problem in relationships. So I wrote the book on finances. I was writing a series of books. I was writing Situations 101, Relationships, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, just 101, like the beginning. And then I said Finances 10, Situations 101, Finances, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And I was going to do a little series of stuff like that. In the middle of that, my mom got sick with Alzheimer's. And so it halted that series type of idea. And I had to take care of her. So as I was traveling, I had my mom with me, but caregiving and Alzheimer's and all that world was a whole big deal. And so when I took care of mother for 8 years, and I learned so much about Alzheimer's medicine, doctors, caregiving, caregivers, and what happens to us. And it's not a good thing. It's not easy. Even so that you would let yourself go. I remember saying this, don't worry about me, BernNadette. Take care of mommy. You have to, keep her alive. That's what you have to do. And I had an 8-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old daughter at the time. So I'm sandwiched in and a husband. So I am sandwiched in with all these things and taking care of mom and touring with my book. So I'm like, okay, we have to do this one step at a time. I took my little 8-year-old girl and I said, she was upset. Mommy, you're showing grandma so much attention. I said, well, you're going to help me with her. And she said, I'm not going to help you. And one day my mom said, why would anyone be jealous of me? I said, Mommy, she's going to learn. She's going to learn. And as we were living with mom and everything, she did learn. I said, I need your help, Brittany. I need your help. Brittany, she's going to be a doctor. But that inspired her to be a doctor because she saw so much and she had to help me. And then my teenager, she's going to college and she's trying. And so she was helping me and everything. But she said something, and I wrote this in that book the last night about my mom. She said she took mom out one day and she said, Mother, I never realized I met my grandmother as a teenager. They were talking like they were teenagers. Because you know what Alzheimer's does, is it brings you way back to teenage life. And she said it was so fun. I mean, it's so many different things that you learn. So
It's
that's
very
what
touching because she wants to be a doctor now.
Brittany does. That was Dior that said she met her as a teenager. But Brittany was the one that was helping me, the most because my other daughter was at college. But Brittany was helping me and she learned so much and she felt so bad. She watched me go through it. She watched her grandmother go down, and it was hurtful for her. And my mother would listen to Brittany when Brittany would say, Mama, she called her Mama, you have to take your medicine now. You have to do this. And my mother would do it. So I think that inspired her to become a doctor.
Does it give you great peace and pride and serenity in your heart to know that your mom got to see you become such a big success and was so proud of you?
Yes, it was such a beautiful time for her and us. We enjoyed that time very, very much. during that Alzheimer's thing. And my mother is the one who got me to Good Times. You know, she was there pushing me, pushed me to Juilliard, pushed me. She was there. And for one time, we were watching Good Times while she was in the throes of this monster of the mind, which I call it. She said to me, we were watching Good Times, and she looked at Thelma on there, and I was sitting next to her, and she looked at me and she said, "You know, that's a cute little old girl." Then I realized that my mother didn't know it was me. She knew something was close to it, but she didn't get it. And I said, and that hurt me so bad. And I said, when this thing is done, I'm going to form a foundation called Good Times. Remember, I said, Good Times and Alzheimer's Foundation, remembering the good times and Alzheimer's Foundation. And I did it because she didn't remember good times.
Well, Miss BernNadette Stanis, I know that through your acting, your writing, teaching, motivational speaking, you've always inspired people to aim high, dream big, break barriers. Thank you for the great example you've set for all of us. And thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
I enjoy this. You are such a wonderful interviewer. I mean, you hit every spot. Thank you so much. Oh, I got to tell you about Philip Michael Thomas, though. I got to tell you about that.
Please do.
Wait a minute. He was the first boyfriend on Good Times, right? And that's when I met him. And like I said, he was such an attractive guy. I just don't know why they didn't make him my first boyfriend.
Well, Lou Gossett Jr. wasn't so bad.
He wasn't so bad, but he was too old. But Philip Michael Thomas would have been perfect.
Yes, I agree. Well, again, thank you so much for being on our show.
You're welcome.
Our guest has been the wonderful actress and author, BernNadette Stanis. For more information about Miss Stanis and to buy her books and other merchandise and learn about her public speaking engagements, please visit her official website, thelmaofgoodtimes.com. And don't forget to subscribe to her YouTube channel, which is now showing on your screen. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you, Harvey, so much.
Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.